Ladies and gentlemen, the PlayStation 6 is shaping up to be an absolute behemoth of a console, sporting the UDNA architecture, also known as RDNA 5 as it was originally known, plus numerous technical advances including a chiplet design, and, well, there's just a lot of stuff to get through here, so let's just jump straight into it. So, Kepler L2 is a well-known leaker. I'll add my own details and additional information, by the way, at the end of this, but let's get his info out first. And yeah, he has kind of given us a summary of the timelines of the console, some of the tech involved, and a lot more besides. So in terms of the development timeline, A0 tape-out is scheduled for Q4 2025. B0 tape-out will be the second half of 2026. This means that most likely by the end of 2027, providing there's nothing really hinky that goes on, the PlayStation 6 should go on sale. So that means that, roughly speaking, we're looking at the same upgrade cycle that Sony have employed with the PS4 to PS5, with the PS5 to the PS6. Now, my guess, and this is not a leak, this would be a guess, I wouldn't be too surprised if we also got a PS6 Pro. That's not something I've heard from a source, but history tends to repeat itself, and since I've even heard that Sony are most likely going to be releasing the PS7 as physical hardware, I wouldn't exactly be shocked if the PS6 Pro does release. But again, that's not a leak, that's just me speculating. Now, the design at this point is complete and is currently in pre-silicon validation phase. GPU and the CPU. The GPU is in early design phase, is based on GFX 13. Now, in terms of the performance and specifications and that type of thing, things are a little bit wishy-washy. Now, GFX 13 is also known as UDNA, or RDNA 5, and this is a really big deal. There's a lot of improvements for RDNA 5, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot. I will probably cover this in a much more comprehensive manner in an upcoming video, and how this will impact Sony, because there's a lot of details that are actually already in the public from what Mark Cerny has revealed regarding the PS5 Pro and how its AI upscaling technology, PSSR, actually functions, that you can start to make some really good educated guesses to what's going to happen with the PS6, because we already again have some leaks regarding UDNA, and I would imagine that Sony are going to continue to customize the design. In fact, that's what Kepler is stating as well. Now, one of the things that Sony did, of course, with PSSR is they essentially are utilizing the small caches on the workgroup processors, and you can check out Mark Cerny's discussion with Eurogamer, plus I think WCCF Tech talked about this, and also it was in the I can't remember what the conference is called, but Sony's official drill down of the PS5 Pro and the technologies within it. So basically what they did is they used the caches of the workgroup processors essentially as a way to just give them a crap ton of bandwidth. And the reason they needed all of this bandwidth is because of the upscaling technology that's in there within the PS5 Pro, and so we can imagine that they're going to continue to evolve this technology. Now at this point, they're only using this for upscaling, but Sony has basically said that this is just the beginning, and the industry as a whole is moving on to some really cool stuff, such as neural rendering. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be inside the PS6, but I imagine we're going to see some big advancements in things like AI and other things. So, you know, we'll talk more about that in just a moment, however. Now, this console will also sport the Zen 6 Halo architecture, and some parts will be manufactured on the TSMC 2nm process. It may sport HBM memory or some type of cache chiplet, more on that in a second. And as I said, the expected release date is probably going to be in the second half of 2027. If I had to guess, and you probably can guess as well as I do, let's just be honest. Historically, all you have to do is look at the rough timelines that the PS4 released, the PS5 released, and so on and so forth, as well as, I believe, the PS4 Pro, as well as the PS5 Pro. And they all pretty much released within the same couple of weeks. So I think we could say end of November, early December at the latest for the PS6, assuming nothing happens with the timelines. So Kepler also mentioned in an additional comment on X or Twitter, that they're not 100% that there is some type of 3D cache technology on the chip. I have heard from multiple people that that is what Sony wants to do. Now, whether it ends up actually happening for the final chip, I don't know, because obviously it could well increase the bill of materials quite significantly. With that said, So one of the things that AMD are pushing significantly, of course, on its APUs and chiplets is memory attached at last level. And so basically, I do think that it's very likely that Sony will be doing this with the PlayStation 6. Now, ultimately, that's a bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo, but I think the PlayStation 6 will actually be a significant departure in terms of how things are handled versus the PS5. So if you basically look at the various technologies within each of Sony's consoles, Sony typically does some very smart decision making in terms of an engineering perspective. Now, this is not me saying that the PlayStation 6 is going to be significantly outperforming a high-end PC at the time, because ultimately there are things like, well, bill of materials that they do need to worry about, and I'm sure that high-end PCs at the time will probably, in terms of a raw graphical prowess, be able to outperform a console. However, those GPUs are also more expensive. What Sony does, however, is make very smart and intelligent decisions exactly what it wants to do with things like silicon budget and other let's say customizations within the silicon itself. Now, if you look at the PS4 to the PS5, for example, the whole design of the PlayStation 5 essentially, and I am vastly simplifying this here, but basically the whole design of the PS5 was to get data as quickly as possible from the SSD through various bits and pieces within the console, in other words, memory, the buses, blah, 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 and then basically have the APU be able to process that, so whether that's going to the CPU or the GPU itself, and basically able to stream data as quickly as possible. I am simplifying that and skipping over a lot of technical details. The whole reason that Sony did this, of course, is to, well, just basically make data streaming much faster, but they did a lot of other stuff within it. They optimized the caches, they did things like, of course, the cache scrubbers, and this really helped developers. And of course, there were other improvements as well, like what they did with the audio, the 3D audio stuff, and obviously ray tracing. And we saw much the same from Microsoft as well, of course. Basically, put in a super fast SSD. They incorporated ray tracing technologies, and this is basically just the start of it. RDNA 5, or UDNA, is going to have significantly more compute performance. From what I've heard, and of course we'll have to wait and see what Sony does for their GPU, because even if what I'm hearing is true for the desktop, it doesn't necessarily mean that Sony will incorporate a 1-to-1 ratio of the same technology. But from what I've heard anyway, UDNA basically incorporates a lot of the matrix cores, essentially, of what you have with the MI300 series. So this basically means that you can start processing a lot of machine learning instructions really, really fast. Albeit, of course, they're going to be evolved by that point. It's going to be very interesting to see what Sony does. Microsoft have already commented officially that they're going to be pushing neural rendering for the DirectX API. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that for the Xbox, although God knows what's happening with the Xbox at this point. So yeah, I'm going to be very much looking forward to Sony and consoles, because while I'm much more of a PC gamer, I also think that consoles are very good for pushing the industry standards forward. So for example, when ray tracing started to become available for consoles, it influenced developers to start incorporating ray tracing within their games and engines, and it basically just helped optimize it for the whole industry. So it's going to be absolutely cool. I will probably put out another video over the next couple of weeks or so regarding the PlayStation 6 and give you guys a lot more in-depth analysis of what's going on. I'm waiting to hear back from a couple of people at this point, and I don't want to start saying one thing or another because it's possible something has changed, but ultimately what I've really heard for the PlayStation 6 in terms of the goals is, yes, AI is going to be a really big part of it, and obviously upscaling is going to be, obvious, because obviously PSSR, probably frame generation and that type of stuff as well, and things like, being able to, let's say, do like, improvements in texture quality and so on and so forth, but also, other than very blatant uses such as using AI for better NPCs and that type of stuff, I've also heard it's going to improve collision detection and do a bunch of other really cool stuff that's just going to make games a lot more, for lack of a better of a word, immersive. So it's going to be very cool. With that said, guys, take care of yourselves, have an amazing day, bye for now.